evening, and thank you for joining this week's Unmasked conversation. My name is Afeni Grace. I am the program coordinator for the Harvey B. Gantt Center. And this week, we kick off our voting campaign by talking logistical voting needs, from understanding voter security to weighing out which voting option is best for you this year. Tonight, we hope to empower you with the tools you need as a voter to make a successful and confident vote. But before we get started, please be sure to click that subscribe button below the screen and visit our website at ganttcenter.org to be updated on all future Gantt Center happenings. We do have a 2-minute audience survey currently linked in the YouTube chat. Please take the time to complete the survey now if you haven't in the past, and that will help us gain more and deeper information in the discussion. Of course, also audience engagement is a huge part of the conversation. Please use the YouTube chat for any questions or comments that you have throughout the evening. If you do have questions for our panelists, try to get those questions in as soon as possible so that we're able to answer them in the time that we do have. And now I am very excited to introduce tonight's moderator, Ohavia O. Phillips. Ohavia is from Charlotte by way of Brooklyn, New York City, and she's truly one of a kind. She's actively involved in all things social media as a digital content creator, speaker, and MC around the city of Charlotte. She's also a thriving talk show host of her self-created show, The O Show. Ohavia loves people and connecting with #Omazing and impactful individuals to impact communities. When you see her, and I can attest to this, you'll be sure to get big energy, a hug, and a Millie Rock. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Ohavia.
Yes, thank you so much, Afeni, and thank you so much to the Harvey B. Gantt Center. I am so excited to be here, so with an OH, but I'm not going to labor before you all long because this is definitely a necessary conversation, and I'm so excited to get into it. So I'm going to start by introducing our amazing panelists. First up is Dr. Jennifer Dixon McKnight. Dr. McKnight teaches at Winthrop University in African American history and United States history. Her research interests include African American history, United States history, and women's and gender history, with a particular focus on using oral history to examine social movements forged by African American women. Dr. McKnight is currently working on a project that focuses on the 1969 Charleston Hospital Workers Campaign and the hundreds of African American working class women at the center of the movement. Dr. McKnight, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're happy to have you. Yes, okay. And next up, we have Danielle Brown. Danielle Brown is the Black Voters Matter NC State Coordinator, a Philip Randolph Institute organizer, and founder of Impacts Incorporated, which is an organization that teaches children to utilize their voting potential at a young age. Its mission is to build political leaders and advocates. She has worked with various labor unions, community, and grassroots organizations on various campaigns to ensure that the mission and needs of the people, no matter who, are met. She is an organizer by trade and a strong leader at heart. She works tirelessly to make sure that the issues of her people are heard and addressed. Family, thank you, and help me in welcoming Miss Danielle Brown. Thanks so much for being here, Danielle. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Michael Dickerson. Mr. Dickerson is currently the Director of Elections for Mecklenburg County and has held his position since 1998. Prior to coming to Charlotte, Mr. Dickerson was with the Federal Election Commission as a Deputy Assistant Staff Director. Mr. Dickerson spent 14 years at the Federal Election Commission. Currently, he is a member of the International Association of Government Officials, the Election Center, NC Directors of Election Association, and a member of the United States Election Assistance Commission Standards Board. Mr. Dickerson, thank you so much for joining us today. You all, here is our amazing panel, and we are so excited to have them. Okay, so I'm going to open up with a question for all of our panelists, and let's get right into it. Okay, so the first thing is, how important in such a time as this, how important is it to teach and research candidates' backgrounds and stances on particular issues prior to voting? And where can voters find this information? Whoever wants to start, we can do it.
Well, I'll say,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Dickerson.
I thought it was the one for everybody. I apologize. Please, Dr. McKnight, you please go.
Oh, I was just going to say, and thank you. I was just going to say, from a historical standpoint, particularly as it pertains to the experiences of people of color, African American people in particular, our history in terms of this nation and our relationship with this nation politically, in regards to voting, and the sort of sordid history that it is. And I won't go too deep into that right this minute, but it's important to understand the value of the vote and how that equals a voice, and how having that voice, and sort of pushing aside the idea, the notion that your one voice is insignificant, that your one voice doesn't make a difference. If you remain silent, then we're all silent. It's so important for us all to sort of engage in the political process, and think of this process collectively, and not allow our voices to not be heard, to wage our vote in this process. And I think that having a clear sense of who it is we're voting for, the issues that they are standing on, that they're pushing forward, the sort of energy with which they're bringing to the political platform, all those things are critical. And I think that we have to be vigilant about the information that's being put out there, sort of sorting through the weeds and getting the facts, in regards to who's coming to the stage, in regards to not just national elections, but local elections as well, which I think are just as important as our general elections.
Absolutely, Dr. McKnight. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, especially with silence being compliance. And so the value of the vote is very important. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. All right. Mr. Dickerson.
Exactly right. It has to be the individual going out and doing their own research. You really cannot expect anybody else to do it for you. You need to ask those probing questions. You have to ask yourself, what is the most important thing to me? If we just watch the campaign commercials, the other person's always an ogre and a worst person in the world. But it's you that has to get out and have to really do your homework on it. It is one of the first questions we get asked as it gets closer to the election. Who should I vote for? Well, I can't answer that for you. Only you can make that decision. But just like Dr. Dixon McKnight said, do not get discouraged. Your voice is extremely important. I love that. That's perfect.
Absolutely, Mr. Dickerson. And I'm glad that you kind of leaned in on what's the most important thing to us as voters, because that's very important in choosing a candidate. Danielle, did you want to chime in?
Absolutely. So I'm going to speak from being a C3, but very particular kind of mode, because ultimately, in C3 spaces, we can't tell you who to vote for. We are nonpartisan. We can't tell you any of that. So we teach folks how to be issue-based, how to take your issues and align them with folks that line up to what they say they're going to do. And then the key piece of all of this is the accountability piece, because I've been telling folks all along for the last couple of weeks, especially, I'm more excited about November the 4th than I am the 3rd, because to me, that's when the real work begins, because now I've hired you. You work for me at this point. I hired you. So everything that you have said you were going to do for me, all these, because I've aligned my issues with you, and everything you said you were going to do for me, I'm going to hold you accountable in making sure that that happens, because you are speaking to what you said you were going to do for me when you came and knocked on my door. I didn't go knock on your door. You knocked on mine. When you sent me your piece of mail, I didn't send you that. You sent me yours. So it's very key that we understand that these folks they work for us, and it's key that we also understand that it's our job to hold them accountable. The same way that our employers hold us accountable when we don't do what we're supposed to do is the same way that we have to be vigilant about encouraging those to hold those folks accountable that we put in office. Those are the ones sitting in those seats for the next 2 to 3 years, sometimes 4, depending on who it is. So it's important that we align those issues and make sure that people understand how to align those issues when we're talking to folks.
That's so good, Danielle. And I love that you also hinted at issue-based, right? So lining up the issues, but also leading to accountability, knowing who we're putting in the seats that can solve our issues. So Danielle, I want to stay with you right here, though. How can we educate Black communities on the importance of voting in time for the upcoming election?
The biggest thing is getting people to understand and bringing it to their level. I love how people always say to me that people come to them and they're talking over their head. And then when I say the same thing, I'm like, this is what they meant. This is what they said. That's not what that was, or whatever, because they feel like you're talking at them and not with them. It's important to engage with folks and understand who they are and where they're coming from. What may look, look one way to me in my neighborhood may not look the same way to Dr. Dixon McKnight in her neighborhood, but we're talking about the same candidate, but it doesn't look the same way. So we have to learn to teach people to look at what their surroundings and basically align what they need to that person that they're trying to elect. But we also have to get people to understand that this is more than just a next 56-day conversation. This is a 365 conversation. This does not go anywhere. I love when people ask me, what are you going to do on November the 4th? The same thing I did November 2nd, the 31st. It's the same thing because it is a continuous conversation. These issues, your issues didn't go anywhere just because you elected somebody today. They didn't go anywhere. It's work. It's a process. And we have to learn to teach people to be a part of that process. As much money as we put into voter registration and to get out to vote, we have to put 3 times more money into voter accountability, which is where we drop the ball in our Black communities every single time. We go in, everybody gets everybody registered. You can get 30, 40,000 people registered, but only 10,000 of them go to the polls. That makes no sense. Where's the disconnect? We have to learn to teach people to be where they are, meet them where they are, help them to align those issues so that they can know and understand it's okay for me to go knock on my mayor's door when something ain't right. It's okay for me to go knock on my congressman's door if something's not right. Most of the time, they're our neighbors, but we put them on this pedestal that they really shouldn't be on because, again, you work for me. It's my tax dollars paying you. So ultimately, we have to learn to teach people to think in that perspective and push them in a way that they understand on their level and speak the language that they speak to be able to make them understand that.
Absolutely, Danielle. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the disconnect when it comes to the numbers, right? So Mr. Dickerson, this is for you. Let's talk disconnect real quick, right? So let's talk about the mail-in ballot. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Dickerson, how is our current issue with the USPS and our mailing system going to affect absentee ballots?
Well, I can only handle the Mecklenburg County Board of Elections. We have had a tremendous conversation over the last 5 years with our local post office here, and they do a great job. The routing center, everybody there does a great job, and they are keenly aware of what's going on. Now, with that being said, I think we're putting about 80,000 absentee ballots in the mail stream by the end of this week. We put out about 40,000 the first day on Friday and Saturday, and we will continue to push those out. What I am telling people to do, if it's an absentee ballot that you desire, to vote it early, ask for it early and vote it early. Give the post office plenty of time. The nice thing about absentee ballots, it's like the nice thing like early voting. You have a chance now to take care of everything if something doesn't fit. If you can't find your ballot, or if you lose it, or you make a mistake, or you don't want to do something, you have a chance now to fix that, as long as you take care of it now. On election day, that's it. That is it. We try to give you a provisional process on election day, but if you are voting now, you can ask for that ballot now. You can receive that ballot, in the next week or so, and that ballot is yours to properly execute and send back to our office. At that point in time, then you can even check to see if it's been accepted and approved by the Board of Elections here at my 5-member Mecklenburg County Board of Elections. So it's a great way to vote. But what I do caution people is it's different than going in and pressing the buttons on the express vote voting panel. It's a fill in the oval. It's the old SATs that we used to take where you're literally filling something in. And you want to make sure you're making the right one. I'm prone to making mistakes. So if I mess up that ballot, people need to know, oh, well, wait a minute, I can get another one. All I have to do is cancel this ballot and I can get myself a new one, as long as it's never been accepted at the board. And that's the final thing I want to add is I am telling people, get this, if you're inclined to think this is my best way to vote, or you're on the fence, get it now as insurance. Yes, it costs me money and time and staff hours to get these ballots out, but that's what we're here to do. We're here to give you the option, the opportunity to get out and make your voice heard, so that on November 4th, you can start knocking on those front doors. And I think it's a great thing to do. You don't have to vote the absentee ballot if you request it. You can take it and throw it away and go vote early, or go vote in person on election day. So it's not, that's not if just because I asked for it doesn't mean I have to vote it. I do not list you as voting until you properly execute it and send it back to my office.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I'm so glad, Mr. Dickerson, you had mentioned getting it as insurance and making our voice heard with voting. So Dr. Dixon McKnight, I'm gonna toss it over to you. With that said, about making our voices heard, many people believe their voices don't count, like, to be quite frank. So what are some examples that highlight the power of an individual's vote?
You know, I want to take us back down the road a bit and think about sort of opposition, early opposition, and I'm talking, let's take it back to late 19th century as an example. When we think about opposition to enfranchisement, such as poll tax, grandfather clauses, literacy tests. On the other side of that, we also can talk about the opposition to disenfranchisement, okay? And an example of that would be, and I always am sort of tickled when I think about these women. So in the late 19th century, there was an organization called the Rising Daughters of Liberty Society, a group of Black women who, and this is during a time, obviously, when women in general could not vote. But Black women often voted or sort of engaged in the political process as a community with Black men. And so there were meetings that Black men would have to strategize and to come up with sort of their collective political voice. And this, as one example, this group of Black women would stand outside and stand guard outside of these meetings to ensure that these Black men on the inside had the opportunity to meet and develop that collective political strategy, that voice, on behalf of their community. And they stood outside and stood guard to ensure that they could do that without harm and without interruption. And so my point is that when we think about the opposition to Black enfranchisement, and we think about the opposition to Black disenfranchisement as sort of examples of how important the vote is. If the vote isn't important, we wouldn't have these two sides of the struggle, right? On the one hand, you have groups who are implementing tests that ask people to name all of the judges in the circuit courts throughout the state, or to name all of the county seats in the state, or to ask people who are making below poverty level income to pay poll taxes or otherwise not be able to vote. And so we see those kinds of effort to keep people from the vote, which gives us an indication that there is an importance to having that voice, to being able to wage your opinion in that way. And then on the other side, you have women who are willing to stand guard and risk themselves, right, in order to ensure that Black men, even though they can't, that Black men have the ability to wage their voice, raise their voices in that way. And so in those two sort of key moments, we see that the vote is important. And when we bring that forward, right, going back to what Ms. Brown said about the strategies that need to be in place, about empowering people to wage that voice, to cast their ballot, the importance of voter literacy and education. If this isn't an important venture, then why is the work necessary? Why are there still so many things in place to try to oppose the widespread engagement in democracy? if this isn't an important thing for all Americans to do, why do we still fight against the opposition to certain groups having access? And so I think that, when we think about the vote, it's important for us to understand that the vote equals your voice, and that it isn't just about your voice. It needs to become a legacy. So what is your legacy? What are you setting forth for future generations? And in doing that, we have to understand that it's not just your voice. It's not just one vote. When you walk into that polling place, you're going in on behalf of all of us, right? And if you don't do that, then the next generation may not do that either. And then what happens?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon McKnight. And that's another thing too that we have to remember is how important our voice is. And you hinged on something so good, the importance of legacy. Mm-hmm. So Danielle, when we talk legacy, right, what is the history and impact of the Black community's voting patterns?
So when we talk about the Black community, one of the things that, I talk to a lot of younger folks, and to be honest, younger folks are in real conversation. They're not enthusiastic about this election. They're just not. They're not enthusiastic about it. They're not looking forward to it. They're tired of hearing about it. All of that kind of good stuff. So that being said, and they definitely don't want to hear somebody died for you. They don't want to hear that. What they want to hear is how we overcame and what it took to get there and where and how it all happened. That's what they want to hear, because it resonates right now with things that are going on. We had the uprising. We're coming off of a huge uprising that basically was pivotal in just the way young folks are thinking right now, and the way that they're thinking about what this election is going to look like, and the way they're thinking about voting, the enthusiasm versus the not enthusiasm. That played a big pivotal point in our 2020 election, the same way it did when people were uprising and protesting and rallying and everything in the 60s. It's the same thing. It's history repeating itself in a different mantra, pretty much right now is what's happening. So when we're talking to young folks, we're talking about really anyone being able to say, this is what they did, surpassing the protests that they had then, the rallies, the dog bitings, all of that. This is what they did. They were organizing in church basements, in the comforts of people's homes, in the back of businesses and barbershops. These were the conversations that were happening. And even though we're in the midst of COVID right now, we have the perfect opportunity to organize, because we are able to talk to each other by phone. We're able to text each other. We're able to utilize those social media pieces to be able to get those things done and to organize literally in the light of day, but not in the light of day. Right. Literally, we have those things available to us that were not available then. So historically, we are literally taking what we've learned in our history, and we're taking that and applying that in a today version. And we're getting to see that. We're getting to see how people are looking at this election in a different way, how they are, the expectation and the outcomes are in of a different way. It's important that our history is, that people know what the history is, how we got from point A to point B, but it's also important to know those background details as well. Everything wasn't a speech. Everything wasn't people standing out, and, with signs or whatever. That was honestly, that was the good stuff. The background stuff is the stuff that we don't get to see. We don't get to see the ladies that were making food for these meetings that were going on. We don't get to see, like Dr. Dixon McKnight said, the women that were standing outside and holding it down to make sure nobody else came in. We don't get to see the children that were told, today you're not going to school. What you're going to do today is you're going to go out here and march, and this is how we're going to do this, and this is what happens if this happens or that happens. We don't get to see all those things. We get to see the outcomes of things. So it's important that we take our history now, because again, folks they don't want to hear somebody died, but they want to hear is how we got over it and how we made it, and how we can take what they did then and apply it to the now, and figure out how we can put our millennial and Gen X and whatever twist on it to make it happen.
Absolutely, Danielle. So many gems. And honestly, for you, Dr. McKnight, I want you to chime in because I know history is your thing. You got that on lock, ma'am. So what is the history and impact of the Black community's voting patterns, Dr. McKnight?
You know, I think Ms. Brown touched on a few things that I think are really key. One, you know, she's talking about that grassroots organizing. You know, when we think about, you know, voting for the Black community, we think about civil rights movement. We think about, you know, and like she said, you know, there's a lot of, in this younger generation, they don't want to hear the speeches. They want to see the movement. They want to know what's being done. They want the action. And the reality is that, you know, within the Black community, there has never, ever, ever, and I want us to be real clear about this, there has never been a moment of complacency. There has never been a moment where Black people have not been fighting for their freedom and for access to the full American experience. And one of the key pieces of that is being able to cast that vote. And, you know, it's important for us to think about not just voting as a means to an end, but also thinking about voting as a practice. It's something that as a community, even though we've been fighting for it for a long time and to have full access to it, we haven't always had access to it. Right. And so it's one of those things, it's almost like riding a bike. If you don't, you learn, but if you don't do it often enough, you get rusty. You forget. You're not in touch with the latest and greatest in terms of what's on the scene or what's available. And so for African American voters in particular, this is a constant struggle to stay current in our access to democracy, in our access to voting and voting rights. And so for within the community, this has been a constant both behind the scenes and right out front sort of battle. And one of the things I think that has been driving this sort of under the surface that we don't hear as much about are those ongoing efforts, which is what Ms. Brown has been talking about, those ongoing efforts to encourage and ensure voter literacy, voter education, and taking the information to the communities that need it. So when you think about the various ways in which voting, absentee voting, you asked about absentee voting earlier, the various ways in which that is carried out, depending on what state you're in, right? If you don't have that information, then how do you know what your options are, right? And people will say, well, you can just Google it. But what if you come from a community that doesn't have access to internet? Right. Then what, right? And so that voter education, that voter literacy is something that we have to sort of hold on to and continue to push forward. And as Ms. Brown was saying, and I really appreciated that, taking that information to people and giving it to them in a way that's relevant to them and their experience, and making sure that they understand what their options are, what the information is that they need to make sure that whenever the day comes, that they're where they need to be with the information they need to have in order to cast the vote that they think is in their best interest.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for chiming in on that, Dr. McKnight. So many gems dropped, but where I want to lean on, and I want to get this perspective from Mr. Dickerson. Dr. McKnight, you said something so good about staying current and active to access in democracy. So Mr. Dickerson, considering that, I wanted to lean a little bit more. How can people, if they wanted to get active and have that access to democracy, how can people volunteer to be an election official? What is that process? What does that look like?
Certainly. It's an easy process. Even on our website, you can click a link and fill out an application. But they also, everybody will get involved in it in their own special way. That's the key. Some people literally walking up and voting is that opportunity for them. I was very proud of my board that I answered to when we decided to have 33 early voting sites starting October 15th. We had never done 22 before, but in this COVID-19 world we're in right now, they said, let's give everybody that opportunity to participate. There are but so many precinct officials or poll workers that we can utilize, but we want everybody to get out there and go practice that fundamental right, that right that you don't really, Ms. Brown was saying, you don't want to give that up. Don't take it for granted. Do not offer, oh, let the next person vote. Do not, oh, there's a line. It looks like a long line because we're all 6 feet socially distanced and I don't want to vote now. No, don't walk away that easy. You wouldn't do that for anything else. You would not do that. Do not do that. Wait there, get in there and make your vote count. That's the key. And stay involved. Stay involved throughout the year. We recruit. We've got some, I think, a database. My precinct manager was telling me we got a database of about 5,000 people. So in this county, we're in great shape for our precinct officials. But there are other ways to get involved. I think somebody told me today they were talking to the Charlotte Hornets. Hey, we'll help you stuff envelopes. If you like, come on down on Friday. So they're going to offer to help us take out, putting their time at. They've already offered their Spectrum Center for us to be an early voting site, as with the Carolina Panthers offering the Bank of America Stadium to be an early voting site. These people are getting involved, and you can do that with just little things like that. When I first started in this so many years ago, I was handing out flyers for a candidate in front of a community center in Greensboro. That's how I wasn't old enough to vote, but my father was deep into this and it was big into the family. I was literally handing out flyers, support your candidates. Now, I don't know if candidates are going to do that this year with COVID-19, but it is one of those things that start early, get involved in it. And the most important part of all this is getting out and casting that ballot. Absolutely. And taking care of that option so that you feel like at that point, I have a stake in this game now. I have cast my vote. My vote is just as important as anybody else on this panel. That's the way we all should look at this. Everybody gets one vote, from whoever you are, the head of a corporation to anybody, the guy driving the taxi cab. Everybody's vote counts the same. So it's just as important that we all get out and make that effort. And understand that your effort is what makes this country great. Your effort to do more, to do that little extra step of voting. I find it amazing. 770,000 voters. If I get 65%, I consider that good. That's another 35% who said, well, I'll let Danielle decide, or I'll let Dr. Dixon McKnight decide who's going to win. Or I'll let Michael, well, don't say that. That doesn't sound good. I just count the votes. I'm sorry. But you're letting somebody else do that for you. Go out and take responsibility. Do it for yourself. You can do this. And it won't be because of lack of option. The absentee by mail, the early voting sites starting October 15th, running for 17 days, Saturdays, Sundays, weekdays, running straight through, and then election day on November 3rd. All 195 polling places will be open and ready to accept your vote.
Absolutely, Mr. Dickerson. So here's what I gather. Cast your vote, stay involved, and let your voice count. I love it. Y'all, don't we have an amazing panel? All right, so listen, speaking of letting your voice count and your voice be heard, I'm going to toss it over to Afeni. There was a 4-question survey, and we're going to take a look at that and discuss with this amazing panel. Afeni?
Yes, thank you, Ohavia. So we're going to switch gears for a moment and discuss the results of the audience survey. Please keep in mind that these results are only based on our audience members who completed the survey. So our first question was, how are you planning to vote in the general election? So as you can see, we have about 58% of our surveyors who selected that they will be voting via early voting. About 20% are voting in person on election day, and about 22% of our surveyors are sending in an absentee ballot. Our next question is, this year, what is your main reason for voting? So as you can see, we have about 66% of surveyors who selected that They participate in all elections. So they have no main reason for voting, just beyond that they vote in all elections. We have about 28% of surveyors who are voting to usher in new leadership. We have about 2% of our voters who are voting to remember those who have lost their lives to police brutality and other racial injustices. We have a good amount of surveyors who put their own responses in. A lot of people just said all of the above. And we have some surveyors who said that they're voting to establish a Black voting bloc and agenda. And other surveyors said that they're voting to influence what happens locally. So our next question was, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your past voting experiences overall? So we have no surveyors who selected a fair or poor experience. We have about 9% of surveyors who selected that they had an average experience, which was a 3. We have a majority of about 52% of surveyors who have had an excellent experience voting. And we have 39% of surveyors who selected that they had a good experience. So our next question is, what do you consider to be the most limiting form of voter suppression? So as you can see here, the pie is all over the place because we gave our surveyors the option to give their own input. So we'll start with the 29% of surveyors who selected that gerrymandering is the most limiting form of voter suppression. Others, about 22%, selected that it's the issues with polling precincts, such as long wait times, inconvenient hours, unsafe locations, outdated machinery, etc. About 20% of surveyors selected that it is felony disenfranchisement. About 8% selected that it's voter ID laws, and then about 4% selected that it's voter registration laws. And I do want to mention some of these kind of individual input from surveyors. One person said that, I feel some people do not vote because they feel their vote doesn't matter and that nothing will change. Another surveyor said high-level leaders intentionally implementing measures to suppress the vote of certain segments of our country is a huge issue with voter suppression. And then someone also said another issue is not having Election Day as a national holiday, so that people can not have to worry about working and voting, and then also not having early voting in all 50 states. So based on this information that our surveyors graciously gave us, Ohavia, was there something that stood out to you or the panelists?
Absolutely, Afeni. So first things first is, and I'm going to direct this question to Dr. McKnight. I saw the word gerrymandering come up. Well, Dr. McKnight, Miss Brown, because y'all too, okay, Mr. Dickerson, all y'all are amazing. But let's talk a little bit about gerrymandering. What is the historical context surrounding gerrymandering, voter suppression? And obviously it's so prevalent that is still on our minds. So could anybody, I'm gonna start with you, Dr. McKnight. Why is that a thing? Like, let's just get into the history of that historical context, and then I'll let you take it away.
So going back to what I was saying earlier about, in the era of Jim Crow, once we get beyond the era of emancipation, the 15th Amendment that gives African-American men the right to vote, we see that particularly in the South, and this is one of those points that lets us know how important the vote is. Once we get to a moment of freedom for African-Americans, and I'll say freedom in air quotes, and African-American men gain the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, Southern states immediately switch into policies where they implement poll taxes, as I mentioned before, grandfather clauses, which means that if your grandfather couldn't vote, neither can you, and literacy tests. Those things, obviously put in place to circumvent African Americans being able to engage in the political process. Why? Well, because when you think about coming out of the era of slavery, there were about, whenever Black men, before these types of measures sort of took full effect, African American men, and they let us know really quickly how important the political process was to the Black community, because we saw within the Reconstruction era about 2,000 and we're talking about between 1865 and 1877. We're talking about 2,000 African American men operating in elected positions, right? All the way up to lieutenant governor. And so we see right out the bat that African Americans are serious about their vote. They're serious about what it means for them to have that political voice. And they're literally forced out from the political process. So by the time Reconstruction comes to an end, white supremacy takes hold, white dominance takes hold. And so things like those three things I named earlier, in addition to intimidation and violence, are used to keep African Americans from the polls. And we shift into, and back between that and lynching and you know, the rise of Jim Crow, we see African Americans go from, you know, 2,000 holding political offices, elected political offices, to being almost completely absent from political office. We see African Americans go from voting in droves, you know, as I mentioned before, women standing guard,
Right.
to African Americans being almost completely absent from the voting rolls. And I'll give you an example. In 1961, in Lowndes County, Alabama, 1961, there was one Black registered voter.
Wow.
And that is in a county where the Black population was about 80%. One Black registered voter in 1961, which is why moments like Ms. Brown raised earlier, you know, with pushes for voter registration, voter education become so important. Because how do you have an entire county that's predominantly Black that has no voice in what happens in their community?
Right.
With one Black registered voter. So that's sort of how we see the Black vote suppressed early on. And so ultimately within the Black community, there has been a fight, there has been a struggle to dig ourselves out of that hole.
Right.
To get to a place where you go from, one, like when you think about that singular
Right.
person in a county that's 80% or more than 80% Black, how do we get represented in local politics? You don't. How does the concern of working class Black people get heard? It doesn't, right? How do the needs of Black families in terms of education and healthcare get dealt with? They don't. So when we fast forward to 2020, we still see a number of those same struggles. You have a number of communities that are predominantly Black that still don't have a significant enough number of Black voters on the roll. And that means that the needs of those people in those communities are being underserved. And so when we think about it from a historical standpoint, it's still the fight to get beyond the voter ID laws, the voter registration laws, the lack of access to polling places, the scarcity of polling places in some communities, all of these things that make it difficult for African Americans, and on top of the fact that we continue to have an issue with voter literacy or illiteracy in many African American communities. So when we think about it from a historical standpoint, it's still a struggle. And it's a fight that we can't sort of back off of. We have to continue in that vein. And I don't know that if it's realistic or reasonable to expect 100%, but I think that certainly should be the goal, because that's what it's going to take in order for us to see some real change and moving in a real positive direction in this country.
Absolutely, Dr. McKnight. All hands on deck to move the needle. I would agree with that. Ms. Danielle Brown, when we talked the survey, was there anything that stood out to you that you would like to share?
I think just the overall results, it looks different from community to community. And I think we really have to understand that. Again, like I stated before, what may look one way on my side of town may not look the same way on your side of town. So what may necessarily be important to me is not necessarily important to you. I may have a family member that is a returning citizen. So that is going to be really important to me to make sure that their rights are restored so that they can vote, which, one of our great partners are here in the state, Forward Justice, just won a huge huge legislation around that on Friday, which is amazing, which is something that we've got people fighting for. We've got people out here doing that grassroots work and fighting for that. When we talk about, gerrymandering, we can't talk about 2020, it's kind of like COVID 2020 kind of equal each other, that kind of thing. We can't talk about voting in 2020 without talking about census work, which census work plays a direct hit when it comes to voting. No ifs, ands, buts about it. And when we talk about the voter suppression, let's talk about census suppression, because we just lost the census by 30 days. That's not going to hit anybody as hard as it's going to hit as our Black and rural communities.
Right.
Point blank, period. So we're talking about, as Dr. Dixon McKnight said, how certain things are put in place. And this is not just by chance. This is strategic. It's strategically put in place to keep certain folks down, particularly the Black community down. So when we're talking about all of that, we're talking about just how when we're working together and we're working as a community to build it all out. And again, it looks different from community to community, from rural area to rural area. What happens in rural Eastern North Carolina doesn't look the same as it looks over in Piedmont Triad, Eastern North Carolina. It doesn't, so we've got people still struggling from a hurricane 2 or 3 years ago. So we've got to really think about how it looks overall and what the common goal is when it's all said and done, because it doesn't look the same. We kind of have to adjust our mode and adjust our thinking and adjust our conversation, because what may be important to me might not, again, be important to you. So what, as it pertains to even going to the polls, I was shocked to hear that nobody had any issues going to the polls. I'm thinking, how many people call me on election day talking about they got issues at the polls? And I'm grateful to be able to know directors like Mr. Dickerson, who I can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, over on Beatty's Ford, this is the situation that's going on. How are we fixing this? What is happening out there? Without me having to drive down there or be across the state driving over there trying to figure it all out. There's people that are on deck that's working together to make that happen. But at the same time, we have to be honest about the situation and the way it looks overall.
Yes, absolutely. Come on, Ms. Brown. Yes. All right. And Mr. Dickerson, for you, I wanted you to chime in. Was there anything in regards to any of the survey results that were striking to you? Any place where you wanted to insert some comments?
Certainly. First off, I won't answer the phone from Danielle Brown now on election day. No, of course, I will. Yeah, I'm teasing. What really stood out to me was the 58% that said they were still going to vote in person early. I applaud that number. It's kind of what we normally expect. I think it was 22% in that group were absentee by mail, and 20% were in person on election day. That 22% absentee by mail is huge. We usually have 4% turn up. This is going to be 5 times what you do by mail. And that to me is a large number. It also proves to me something that started, I think in the first President Obama administration, that no matter what you do, more people will vote early than they do on election day. In presidential elections, more people show up, vote early, instead of going out on election day or vote by mail. So I now applaud my board for agreeing to 33 early voting sites. And these sites were picked with a few things in mind. So this is my pitch for the early voting, if you allow me the liberty. The pitch for early voting this year is that we have selected large sites. We mentioned the Spectrum Center, the Bank of America Stadium, the Bojangles Arena are just a few to name. We've also selected the public high schools, since most high schools in town are on the e-learning. They're all learning from home right now. There's a gymnasium. I can put 20, 25 voting panels in each of those, keep them 6 feet apart, and people will feel safe. I still go to the grocery store, to the department store, whatever. I will still do that. And I still see hundreds of people out there with me, but we're all very cautious. We're wearing masks, hand sanitizers. I will have all of those things. It is my goal to keep my poll workers safe, my staff safe, and the voters safe. And that's what I want them to do. So seeing that 58%, Javier, just made it, that just made me feel better. I'm going to be able to tell my staff that tomorrow, and they'll actually see a light at the end of the tunnel with all these absentee requests we're getting. But that is great to see. And what I like that is, when I first started doing this back in 2000, early voting, I think we had 58,000 voters show up early. 58,000, that was it. And I was disappointed that everybody should vote. And as I said, by the time we got the last presidential election, 282,000 people voted early. So the swing has been monumental on that. But I was told, and I've always used this as a reason for make sure I outfit all the precincts on election day. You can do all the early voting you want, Michael. It's a great idea. But someone told me, make sure you open up those polls on election day. And I said, no, that's old fashioned. A lot of people like to get dressed up and make it the event. And that, when you hear that, when you see people do that, they have got it. They have figured it out. This is an event. It's not just me getting dressed up, but I respect it so much that I am coming year after year after year. Presidentials come but once every 4 years. I can barely get 35, 40% at every other election. Presidential, 65, 67%, maybe. But those are the same people that show up time after time after time, and will continue to do that because they have it. They have got it. They have figured it out, that this is the way you make change. And this is what we can do to make sure our voice, as it may sound like one voice, it may just sound like one person, but all those voices together make a beautiful choir. And it will easily, that's what you want people to do. And if they all do that, then it just makes the place that much better.
Absolutely. Yes, sir, Mr. Dickerson. So listen, y'all, make it an event because it is the main event. Okay, so considering the time of this amazing panel, we have turned it over to you all. So we asked for you all to insert some of your questions so that the panel can chime in on them. And we have the top 10 questions. So we hear you, we see you, and let's get into the questions straight from the audience. So the first one goes to Dr. McKnight. Dr. McKnight, the question was, can you speak to the Electoral College, its history and its future in respect to America's descendants of slaves?
I don't think we have enough time.
I'm trying to tell you.
Let me say this, and I'm going to take it a little bit broader.
Yes, ma'am.
Electoral College. I'm going to say, when we think about the nation's politics in general, in terms of how it has, or how it was framed and how it has impacted the African-American experience in particular. If we take it back to the founding of the nation, the drafting of the United States Constitution, it's important we understand a couple things. The people that were in the room that drafted that Constitution, they were all men, obviously. They were all either property owning or property, they were wealthy, or at the very least property owning. They were, more than half of them were college educated in a time where only 1/10 of the American people were college educated. More than half of them were college educated. Mm-hmm. These were the framers of our Constitution. Whenever they developed the Constitution, they did not do so with any consideration for African Americans as free people, with women in mind, not even with discussion about citizenship in mind, or Indians or Native Americans for that matter. But when it comes to Black people in particular, when we talk about how our nation is developed, whenever we transferred from slavery to freedom, whenever we transferred from a nation of being colonized to a nation of independence, Black people were not a part of the equation as free people. So whenever they framed the Constitution, whenever they envisioned America's democracy, it was not with Black people as free people in mind. Whenever the Electoral College was developed, that was not done with Black people as free people in mind. However, whenever the United States Constitution was drafted, that first section, I believe, that second article that talks about the 3/5 compromise, it does talk about Black people as enslaved people and their bodies, 3/5 of their bodies, counting as or towards representation for the purpose of slaveholders having a voice.
Wow.
So when you think about the nation, sort of framing of the nation's democracy, it's important that we understand that as a part of our history. And so when we think about the impact, we have to go beyond the Electoral College. Let's go all the way back to the original document, to the document that frames our current democracy, and understand sort of where we stand based on where we stood.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am, Dr. McKnight. Let me tell you, if you need an intern, I am ready to serve.
You made me put my glasses off on that one. I'm sorry.
No, we love it. No, thank you so much, Dr. McKnight. All right, Mr. Dickerson, this question is for you from the audience. Has Spectrum Arena been confirmed as an early voting place?
Correct. It has been confirmed, and we are working on that now with my folks working the logistics. But yes, it has. It will open up October 15th, which is a Thursday, run weekdays 8 to 7:30. That will also run Saturdays, I think it's 8 to 3, Sundays 1 to 5. The last Saturday is October 31st, Halloween, and it will end at 3 o'clock on that last Saturday. And again, they have been gracious about everything they've been doing. Fantastic partners, really, that citizenship of the county citizenship type of thought that they are. And it's not just for us. I think they've expanded their, obviously you can only vote in Mecklenburg County if you're a Mecklenburg County resident, but I think they're making efforts into South Carolina and other counties throughout the state, realizing how important their work is and how important all of this work is. And I think that just sets a great example for everybody else.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And to the audience, be sure to watch back for those dates and times so you all can pull up at the Spectrum Arena. And this is a question from the audience for Miss Danielle Brown. Are there programs ensuring those previously incarcerated are registered, can vote if applicable?
So yes, I can definitely speak to, I can't speak to all of it, but I can speak to some of it because we are just partners with them. But there we have, again, our wonderful team with Forward Justice that is working tirelessly to ensure that folks have their rights restored when it comes to returning citizens. So if you definitely go to their website or Facebook page, you can find out more information about that. Also too, just in general, you have multiple organizations throughout this state that are working either in conjunction with or have their own that they're trying to ensure that folks are, their information's up to date, that they can vote, those rights are restored, they have the information that they need, they're trained to ask the right questions so that people, don't get caught up in anything that they shouldn't be caught up in. Because ultimately our goal is to ensure that your rights are restored and not be a hindrance to those rights. So we've got trained folks that are out here that again know how to ask those right questions, know what to say, how to do it, tell you where to go, all that kind of stuff to be able to do that. And we're happy to be partners as Black Voters Matter with over 25 partners here within the state, across the state, some in rural areas, some in urban areas, but definitely happy to partner with them that are making that happen and support them in that work that are making that happen.
Absolutely. And big ups to you too, Danielle, for being a part of that effort. Again, we do better together. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so this is a question for all from the audience. And I'm going to start with you, Danielle, only because you're still on camera with your beautiful self. Can you discuss the importance of voting at the local level just as well as the presidential?
Ooh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Hallelujah.
Yeah, it's a sign. It was a sign. You
yes.
Yes.
So I'm blessed to be able to have participated in multiple elections across the state of North Carolina. I have seen folks win and lose by one vote. And they were talking about local elections. When we talk about down ballot, because ultimately that's what we're discussing right now. You're talking about down ballot. I'm telling folks left and right, there is more than just those 2 top seats that we are looking at. Even though that's what we all are seeing on TV and, you know, in social media, whatever, there is more than those 2 top seats. If we're working our way down, there's 435 seats open in the House this year. There is 35 seats that's open in the Senate this year. If we are not careful, we will historically repeat, because we will be so happy to have a Black woman on the ballot because we made history in doing that. But we will repeat history by having this Black woman in office with no support. We have to have support, not just from not from the federal level, but at the local level as well. We have to learn how to stack in our own interests and not go against it. We will repeat everybody got all happy because we had Barack Obama in office. We had our first Black president. Everybody got happy about that, but they failed to stack that House, and they failed to stack the Senate, and they failed to stack locally. So what happened was everything that he tried to put in place was a fight. We have to learn to not always be in the fight like that. We have to learn to stack in our own favor. So when we talk about how important it is, even locally, you can go knock on your mayor's door when you're not happy. You can go and knock on your city councilman's door when you're not happy. You can go and knock on your House representative's door when you're not happy, and ask not to see a staffer. You can say, I want to see you. These are the things the rights that you have. And ultimately, again, like I said, when we first started, we're hiring you. Right. You work for me. It is not the other way around. We have to train and rethink this whole process, because when it's all said and done, we have to locally be able to sustain ourselves. We have to locally be able to say, you know what, we good in North Carolina. We got this. When supplies don't get here, we've seen what COVID-19 can do. We've seen when supplies can't get here because somebody said, you know what, I'm not sending it to you because I don't like you today, or I'm having a tantrum, so I don't want you to have this today. But we also seen governors say, you know what, I'm going to bypass you and go get what my folks need. Right. We've seen local cities say, I'm going to bypass you and go get what my city needs. We have to learn to stack in our own favor. So that is, it's important that we not just think about the top 2 seats, but how everything below that impacts those top 2 seats.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Danielle. That is key. Over 400 seats. Wow. Dr. McKnight, I want you to chime in on that as well. Can you discuss the importance of voting at the local level as well as presidential?
I agree with what Ms. Brown said 100%. I think, it goes back to what I said earlier about that voice. And that when we think about who we elect locally as a representation of what we need and what we want and our interests going forward into larger spaces, into, the United States Congress, and being able to have our state, our cities, right, our communities represented fully and appropriately in those spaces. And as Ms. Brown said, if you don't take the time and go beyond the sparkle, right, and the cameras and the news coverage, and get down to brass tacks, grassroots organizing, the sort of real local issues, because what's happening at a national level is one thing, but whenever children in the community can't get appropriate health care, right, that's not the president's issue, that's a local issue. And if you don't have the right people in place, if you haven't elected the right people, then that'll continue to be an issue that you'll never hear anything about in national news, right, because that's not a national news story. And so I agree with her 100% that we have to be real careful about getting caught up in the sensation of the moment and be real clear about what's happening at every level. And that goes back to earlier conversation that we were having about voter literacy and understanding who you're voting for. You need to be well versed on these folks, and also being real clear about going beyond what flashes on a television screen, the campaign ads and things of that sort. We live in an age of technology. You can find out anything you want to about anybody, right? You can go back and pull up high school yearbook pictures if you need to, right? So it's important to understand, and as one of my colleagues says, pull receipts.
Yes.
Get real clear about who's representing you, and what are they really saying? Who have they been before they stepped into the spotlight? What was their platform 2 years ago, not just today? Who have they been? Who's showing up today? Are these all the same people? And is this the person I want representing me at various levels? And so I think it's just important for us to be strategic, be smart, be inquisitive, and tap into those various spaces, some like that with Ms. Brown is affiliated with, that have answers, that have information. And if they don't have it, they can point you in the right direction. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Tap in, strategize, and pull receipts. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Mr. Dickerson, I want to turn this question over to you. In sum, can you discuss the importance of voting at the local level as well as the presidential?
To me, it develops a habit. To me, if I look all the way down the ballot, I will see what are the other things that are going to affect me when I drive my car down the street, or when I see a high-rise apartment building going up. These are the people that are making the local decisions that affect me. Yes, more than the office of president might, but I agree with the panelists that we're those political people. We love elections. We follow this. And I am fully aware that everybody else may not do this. Obviously, it is not their interest, and we all have other interests out there. And I'm fully aware of that. But all we're asking you to do is show up on one day a year, primary possibly, but one day a year. Get out, and if you've done all your homework, you're going to make a great educated decision, and you may win or you may not win. So don't get discouraged. I've got younger daughters who would say, "Oh gosh, my person didn't win." It's okay. You got involved. Your voice was heard. Your voice was heard, even in a dissent vote against somebody. Your voice was heard. When you listen to a Board of County Commissioner meeting, the three at large always advertise themselves as, "I am representing all 1 million registered citizens of the Mecklenburg County." That's pretty powerful. If you look at that and say, "Wow, I've got 1 million people either supporting it or behind me, and I've got to make the decisions for the good of the many." So that's a great thing to see. Just fully participate and don't skip. My ballots force you, at least my express vote machine ballots force you to look at the entire ballot. So you can't say, "I didn't see it." Everything will be on there. I love that about our voting equipment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, I want to say thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I know for me, there was so much to be learned. I also feel inspired. I mean, I was going to vote early anyway, but fully prepared to pull up to the polls. Okay. But before we go, I just wanted to give all of our panelists some last words if they want to share anything, any resources for the audience. So I'm going to start with Dr. McKnight. Is there any final words that you have, resources for the audience? I'm turning it over to you.
Well, I will just say, again, like I said earlier, we live in an era where there are a lot of digital resources in terms of history. Pull receipts, like I said before, get the facts, get the information. When you make decisions, when you cast your vote, make sure you do so with a keen sense of information, and making sure that you've gathered and that you have the full weight of what's available out there to sort of back you up, and making sure you're making your decision informed. But cast your vote. Make sure your voice is heard. Don't assume that your voice won't count, that your vote won't count, because it does. Because your vote could be that one. As Ms. Brown said, she's seen elections that could have been won by that one vote. That could have been your vote. So just make sure you show up and do that. And I just want to say thank you for having me on the panel, and thank you to the Harvey Gantt Center. It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you, Harvey. It's been wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And so you all have a great night.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. McKnight. And I'm serious about that intern. I'm ready.
Call me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. McKnight. Okay, to the beautiful Miss Danielle Brown, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Any final words that you have for our audience, also providing things as a resource for those who are watching and would like to get active, particularly around this time?
Absolutely. I would just tell people ultimately, when it's all said and done, this election, like any other one, we're hearing, how critical it is, how important it is. But this election it speaks for itself. 2020 has spoken for itself. And we are about creating, creating a movement, creating, a voting movement. And it's going to be so amazing to see what that movement's going to look like on November the 4th. Again, I'm very excited about that day. And I'm pretty sure Mr. Dickerson is too. but I'm excited about that because ultimately we would have, gone and done our due diligence. We would have masked up or mailed up, one of the two, to be able to go and do this work. We all, again, become entrepreneurs. On October the 15th, we begin the hiring and the firing. It is our job to ensure that folks understand who is on this ballot, who they're voting for, they're educated, they know what they're talking about. They're not just taking somebody else's word. They're going in here knowing, you know what, I know what I want. I know who I want. I know who I would like to hire and who I would like to see in office. And then once we are done with that, they're holding them accountable. We cannot drop the ball on that piece. We have to ensure that these folks are held accountable and they're doing what they say they're going to do in our community. So that is so important for folks that want to get involved. There's so many opportunities across the state of North Carolina alone to get involved, and you can definitely visit blackvotersmatter.org and connect with us, or you can visit apri.org and connect with us there. There's multiple organizations that I work with that are doing some amazing work, and they're all doing it in their own right, with the same mission in mind, and that's ensuring that folks are getting to these polls, they're voting, they're doing what they need to do, they're staying safe. We've got folks out here mask hoarding right now. They're collecting masks just in case you show up and you like, you know what, I don't know if I want to do it. No, here you go. There's no excuse. Here you go. We got you. We've got folks collecting pens right now, black pens. Like that's like the big thing. Let's find a pen, because we want folks to feel comfortable, be safe in the work that they're doing, so that when they do go, there's no issues. There's nothing. There's no excuses. And North Carolina is so blessed not to have all these excuses. We have options, and to utilize those options. So thank you all so much for having me tonight. I've definitely enjoyed myself, definitely enjoyed being on here with the panelists. And it's been an amazing ride. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Danielle. You're amazing. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Dickerson, final words, resources for our audience that are watching. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. First, thank you very much for your job as moderator. It is greatly appreciated. And thank you to the Harvey Gantt Center for asking me to participate. And thank you for having such a great group of panelists on here. It feels great when you see that sort of stuff, and it is really encouraging that yes, there are people that are involved, and it's not just you. You're not me. I'm not just interested in it. There are plenty of other people out there. I think they do a fantastic job, and I applaud them. I will just echo a little bit of Danielle's words to just please stay safe as you vote. We are trying to socially distance everybody so that everybody does feel comfortable, does feel safe, wearing face masks. My poll workers and everybody will be there, and they will be outfitted and ready to go. When early voting starts, first day it's going to be very busy, but the second, third, fourth, and fifth, sixth day, it might not be. So you may plan your time. Don't hit it at a peak time. But other than that, just enjoy your experience. Again, I tell people this is an experience. You go out and you may not you may not feel the reward immediately, but you will definitely feel the reward as you realize, hey, I'm like all the other millions of people out there who cast a vote today. To me, that is it's a huge group that you're a part of, and you are part of the people making the difference. So again, thank you very much for your time. Look forward to seeing everybody at early voting starting October 15th.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Dickerson. And I'll be out there. We'll all be making it an event. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, yes, audience members. So listen, obviously, Harvey Began has been standing in the gap with this Unmasked series on a plethora of different topics. And what I love is this one is no different, right? So they are making all of the information that we need available to us. Don't let it go to waste, okay? Listen, here's what I need y'all to do. Pull up in your own way. You know what that looks like. There's more than one way to do it, but at the end of the day, the theme is make your voice be heard, okay? So I would like to thank the Harvey Began Center for allowing me to always pull up with my portion as it pertains to moderating these important conversations, but also to them, giving them flowers for holding this important conversation. And I'm gonna toss it over to Afeni. Afeni, man, this was amazing.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was, Ohavia, and you really helped make it amazing. Thank you so much for your input, for your final words, and for leading tonight's discussion. So the Gantt Center is focusing the next 55 days to use our platform to spread awareness for a full understanding of our power as voters, so that our community has access to making a safe and informed vote in this pivotal time. To support our mission, please consider using our Text to Give platform. By texting Unmasked to 345-345, your donations allow us to bolster our efforts and deepen our reach. We thank you in advance for your support and for tuning into tonight's conversation. And be sure to tune in Tuesday, September 22nd at 7 p.m. as we further discuss voter suppression, and we'd also discuss ways that we can use our voice in spite of the odds. As always, please be safe and have a great night.